Hi, and welcome to Sci-Fi Fans. And this week, I'm just going to talk to you about some movie flops, bit of trivia, and the latest shenanigans of Hollywood. So, something that I find really interesting is what becomes a flop and what films really succeed. Now, how do you define a flop? There are various metrics that some people would go for. Some would argue that if it has a large budget and it makes very little of that budget back at the box office, then that would be classed as a flop, which is a fair assumption, I would agree. The other thing that is, I think, considered a flop is audience numbers. Did many people watch the film in the first place? What was the feedback? And, you know, what was the general buzz about the film? Some films have a really good buzz, but they don't necessarily make it a hit. And some films are a total hit when there's something that rhymes with hit instead. Um, I think with everything else, it comes down to perception and taste and interest. And we're all different on that scale, which is what makes the whole world and life really enjoyable. I mean, who wants to live in a sanitized world where we all think and feel the same? Some might argue that that's the way the Hollywood studio executives have been going recently, which is why a lot of the films these days are generally the same thing. They're a generic story, generic characters. Male characters are the fools in these shows. Women characters have unbelievable power, and yeah, this all comes under the woke category. I'm not a fan of the woke films. I think they've, as many do, I think that have totally destroyed Hollywood, and the magic of movies has gone because of it. Will Hollywood ever get that magic back? Who knows? I'd hope so. I'd like to think that that is a possibility. One must always live with redemption in mind. So, anyway, here are some of the biggest bombs or flops of all time, and we're going to be starting off with one of those Marvel films, and Captain Marvel. I mean, Captain Marvel itself was reasonably successful, but then you had the Marvels, the follow up film, which came out recently last year, and that totally flopped. And I can understand that because a lot of the Disney stuff, the Marvel's Disney stuff, has been dire. It's been very much message driven rather than character driven, and we're losing the magic, or I think we've lost the magic of what made the MCU so wonderful. They've taken away quality characters, they just killed them off in Endgame, and I understand that. You know, Endgame was the pinnacle of the MCU, and in order to go forward, they felt that they had to kill off certain characters such as Iron Man and Captain America. Of course, we lost Black Widow in those two films, and they never really replaced them with anybody that had the charisma. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. has gone through an awful lot in his life, and he's bounced back to become this absolute mega star. But some might argue, though, is he the star of the films, or is it the characters that became the star of the films, thus killing the popular movie star ethos or ethos? Anthony Mackie said this in an interview at Comic Con a couple of years ago, and he did express an opinion that I think is reasonably valid with the fact that nobody goes to see a particular movie star anymore, they go to see the character. I think that may change in time. Tom Cruise, I think, is one of the actors that has always been a box office draw. But then, having said that, the last Mission Impossible film was not considered a success compared to the previous films in the series. So, who knows? Who knows where the future of cinema and pop culture is going? Hopefully, things can pick up. We have the new Alien film coming out this year, and I'm really stoked for that. With some skepticism, because we've been burnt before in the Alien franchise. But anyway, I digress. Now, one of the biggest flops of recent times has been 88, the rhythm section. The rhythm section starred Jude Law and Blake Lovely, and it received negative reviews from the crickets. I think I'd probably get negative reviews from crickets. So no, it was negative reviews from the critics at the time, and it failed to give the performance that everyone expected commercially at the box office, and it struggled to recoup its production budget of the box office, and this led to an estimated loss of $40 million. As we go through these films, you'll probably notice that $40 million is an awful lot of money, but it's not quite as much money as some of the other films that are considered to be flops. Charlie's Angels, for example, also made a loss of $40 million, but I'm not talking about the Drew Barrymore Charlie's Angels. No, this was the remake of 2019 that was released, and I'm not surprised that this film flopped, in all honesty, because the cast don't have the charisma of the original, which also had some of the charm from the original 70s TV show, starring Kirsten Stewart and Naomi Scott with Ella Balanski. I can see why this film flopped. Could this be the star power or characters? I think this is because of the lack of star power. I think this film gives a demonstration of not having a big enough star. Kirsten Stewart, some may argue, is a large, humongous star A-lister in Hollywood, but that's only due to Twilight. She's never really done anything that has gone on to be a success on the same scale as Twilight. And then again, Twilight was only a success because of the humongous fan base that the books had, and everybody wanted to see the film adaptation, kind of like 50 Shades. I think anybody that's read 50 Shades with half a brain will say, yeah, it's garbage, but it's like fast food. It's binge-worthy garbage. And then they made the film with the Dakota Johnson, and it was a success monetary-wise, but very much a success, a failure critically, because of the star power, I think. Now, Kirsten Stewart was in Charlie's Angels, and that film bombed with a loss of $40 million. Call of the Wild. Call of the Wild was based on a book by Jack London, and it featured a CGI animated dog alongside live action characters such as Harrison Ford. He played the lead role. Yeah, I haven't seen this film, so I can't really pass any judgment on this one, but it made an estimated loss of $60 million. So the losses are going up slowly. Ali, the loss on this one is $63 million. It stars Will Smith. Now, is Will Smith has the star power of the past? I don't think so. And I think the next film that he's got coming out, which I think is Bad Boys, it's the third or fourth Bad Boys film. I think that's going to be a relative successful film, but I don't think it's going to be the success that everyone thinks it's going to be just because of Will Smith. So anyway, he's taken on the role of the legendary boxer Muhammad Ali, and this focuses on Ali's career between 1964 and 1974, so a decade of one of the greatest boxers, if not the greatest boxer of all time. Excuse me. So, Will Smith and John Viggett actually received Oscar nominations for this film, but it was a box office bomb, grossing $87 million against a production budget of approximately $120 million. So, there you go, it's $60 odd million loss. Now, the thing that these figures don't seem to take into consideration is marketing. A lot of people will say wholeheartedly, and I do agree with this, if the film costs $100 million, then 9 times out of 10 they will spend the same amount as the production cost on marketing. So it's now $200 million. Then once the film goes into theatres, if it doesn't make $300 million, it doesn't make a profit. And the reason for that being, you have to pay the theatres to show the film, and they take roughly, depending on where they are in the world, about a 50% cut. So I can see why it's really difficult for some films to make a profit when the margins can be so thin. Now, there's the next film on the list is The Postman, and this stars Kevin Costner. So these are surprising. I think these films have surprisingly big stars in them, but they just don't make the mustard, as they say. So this film made $20 million worldwide, but that's against a budget of approximately $80 million. So, yeah, the estimated losses here are $60 to $70 million, because none of these figures are 100% final in all cases. Some of them are just estimates. And if we're going to talk about flops and how not to make a film, where better to start or what better film to talk about than Ghostbusters 2016? I would say this film is divisive amongst the fan base, but I think 99% of Ghostbusters fans accept this for what it is, and that is utter garbage. It kind of takes the comedy and the fondness of the previous two films that came before it, manages to mix it up with some, quite frankly, unfunny comedians. I don't think I've laughed really at any of these comedians when I've seen them individually. And then they also kind of neutered, and I mean that literally. They neutered Chris Hemsworth. Chris Hemsworth. I would love to meet him and ask him what was he thinking, playing such a real pathetic character in movies. I don't think there's been such a pathetic character as Chris Hemsworth in Ghostbusters. Now, that was obviously they were trying to ride on the name of Ghostbusters to make a profit, and boy, did it backfire in 2016. So they made an estimated loss of $75 million. Yeah, I mean, I'd give my right arm for just $5 million to make a film. So moving on to some of the more surprises, shall I say, on this. So Power Rangers, very popular TV series, big fan base, made absolute mega bucks with toys and TV and everything else. So they tried to reboot the franchise, and this was for a new generation. But believe it or not, Power Rangers, this film lost $76 million. So, yeah, I mean, I'd love to know how these studios keep going, particularly Disney, because if we look at the Star Wars franchise, they have made colossal losses. And the first one of the films to make one of those colossal losses was Solo, A Star Wars Story. I think this film, it's unjustified, the criticism that this film gets. It obviously following on the back of Rogue One, which is the best Disney Star Wars film that they've made so far. In fact, I'd say it's the only good Disney Star Wars film that they've made. Star Wars: A Solo Story, I didn't feel it was too bad, but obviously in the minority because it didn't make a great deal of money. With a budget of, with a gross of $394 million. Now it's got an estimated loss of $77 million. I would put that more at $200 million, given the fact that these figures don't really take into consideration the marketing, like I mentioned earlier. Was or is Star Wars: A Solo Story a justifiable flop? I don't think so. I think they tried to do something slightly different. They gave you a backstory. There were some niggly bits in there, like we didn't need to know about the dice, for example. What did we need to know about that for? We didn't. So I do think there were some directorial character changes or info that we didn't really need to know about. One film that I think justifiably has made a loss, and that is Andrew Lloyd Webber's adaptation of Cats, or the adaptation of Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cats. The premise is a good one. Take a West End show and make it into a multi-million-pound or dollar movie, bring in the audience. It's a well-known brand. You know, Cats by Andrew Lloyd Webber should draw in a large crowd. But overall, the poor CGI, I think, and there's no pun there with it being cats and poor, but the poor CGI and lack of enthusiasm from the public meant that this film made a loss of approximately $80 million. So, yeah, that's quite a lot of money. And given the fact that Andrew Lloyd Webber is a multi-millionaire, I'm quite sure he's not too fussed about that. Following the trend of the 1980s original, Blade Runner 2049 has a good cast. This is one of those films that I'm going to be talking about that I understand why it bombed, because I found it totally boring. Now, I know there are some listeners that are going to say, hang on a minute, Wayne, I really enjoyed Blade Runner 2049, and I'm looking forward to the sequel, which I believe they're looking at now, and that's going to be called 2099. So yeah, I mean, it's got a fan base. It's Ridley Scott again. So it had all the ingredients. The one thing that it didn't have, though, which is a shame because I believe he would have been alive at the time, is Vangelis. Vangelis should have made the soundtrack to Blade Runner 2049, the epic, phenomenal, original soundtrack that he came up with and gave us. He should have been given the opportunity to do the sequel soundtrack, and I don't understand why he didn't. Maybe one of you in the comments can tell me. So, why didn't Vangelis get to make the Blade Runner 2049 soundtrack? But as I say, it had a good cast. Ryan Gosling, Harrison Ford comes back for this, Dave Bautista as well. The visuals are great, but I found it too slow. I found it pretty much a very boring film. So I can understand why it did go on to fail and make a £80 million or $80 million loss. So there you go. That's that one. So coming up next, we've got Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. This is one of those films that I think had potential, a bit like the Disney, the Mars. I'll probably get to it in a second. John Carter of Mars. That's the one. Again, I think that had great potential, based on a novel, I believe, but it didn't cut it at the box office. So Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets has a good concept to it. So it was directed by Luc Besson, and it was based on the French science fiction comic series. And it is visually stunning, and I enjoyed it. Now, it grossed 220 million worldwide, so you'd think, yeah, it's made a reasonable amount of money. But because of the production and the advertising costs, as I've mentioned, advertising costs are a real Achilles heel for these movies. It's estimated to have made a loss of £82 million or dollars. And that's a shame because it's really not a bad film. I think it's a little bit of fun going along. Now, in 2018, one of the many famous English fairy tale stories was reimagined for a modern audience, starring Taron Egerton and Jamie Foxx, with attempting to take a different spin on the story of Robin Hood. There's been so many. I think Robin Hood Men in Tights is one of my favourites, as well as the Kevin Costner one, Prince of Thieves. I think those two are really good. And I do like the Disney Robin Hood with the fox and stuff. Anyway, they tried to make it a little bit more action-packed, and sometimes I think less is more. You have a classic story like Robin Hood, and you try and chuck in all these bits of modern-day effects and action, and they kind of detract too much. That's probably the case for this one, because Robin Hood in 2018 or 2018 even, it's 2018, isn't it? That made an estimated loss of 84 million at the box office. So yeah, I mean, what do you think of these films so far that have made a loss? Are any of them surprising you? One film that surprised me is Seventh Son, starring Jeff Bridges and Julianne Moore. Now, this did have a troubled production process to begin with, which obviously helps bump up the cost of these films. But that's another film that had an estimated loss of $85 to $90 million. Um, Rise of the Guardians. Uh, Now, this is a film that was generally well received by critics, but obviously, as an animation, you wouldn't expect it to have such a big budget of 145 million pounds, dollars, whatever, grossing 306 million. The estimates for this are that it lost about 87 million pounds of dollars during the marketing. The marketing really is a pain. If you don't get the marketing right, then it doesn't appear to be, no matter how good your film is, if it doesn't get you don't get the marketing right, you ain't going to be making any profits, which is a shame for some of these films, because some of them you'd look at now and you think, well, why didn't this succeed at the box office? Sorry, I've got a little bit of a cough tonight. Another film that has been told and retold and told some more is Peter Pan. In 2003, a newer version of Peter Pan was released, and this actually gave us a loss of $90 million worldwide. It had a worldwide gross of $122 million, but it still managed to make a loss of $90 million. So again, not a big hit, and I would have thought a story like that would have succeeded because of the history and the love that Peter Pan has across all age groups. I mean, I quite like Peter Pan, but I'm not a Disney fan, but I like the Disney animated version of it. So it's a bit like Pete's Dragon. I remember watching the original as a kid, seeing it in the cinema actually, and yeah, I enjoyed that. Another remake, and I think that's possibly one of the reasons why these films have failed, is the amount of remakes that are here. In 2017, I wasn't too enthused, shall we say, with Tom Cruise. Now, I think he'd done The War of the Worlds at this point, and I was bitterly disappointed with that film. I love the book. It's my favourite book of all time. I love Jeff Wayne's musical version. If you haven't heard his musical version of The War of the Worlds, then grab yourself a copy and half hour and a half, sit down, just listen to it. Get some headphones and listen to it. It's fantastic storytelling. It's got great songs in it. The cast are perfect. Not too keen on the modern cast of it on the stage show, but that's just me. It's a personal preference. Yeah, it's The War of the Worlds. If you're a big science fiction buff like I am, and you haven't picked up the book, why not? You know, it's by H.G. Wells, the godfather of science fiction. There are people that wrote science fiction books and stories before him. They're considered the first science fiction authors. That's fair enough. They can have that crown. But for me, the godfather of science fiction is H.G. Wells and The War of the Worlds. But I digressed there, didn't I? So anyway, Tom Cruise was in The War of the Worlds, and yeah, just don't bother. So he then picked up the role or a role in The Mummy in 2017. And this is something that is very popular amongst movie studios at the moment, is they have to have their own universe. So we have the MCU, we have the DCU, we have the Monsterverse, and this is something that Universal wanted to try and do with what they were going to call the Dark Universe. This was going to be a cinematic universe focusing on the characters that they have, such as the Mummy, I think the Mummy, Dracula, El Grey, not El Grey, the guy that's affected by the painting. Well, anyway, Jekyll and Hyde was one of them as well. The Mummy has, on paper, a stellar cast. Unfortunately, again, it's one of those that didn't really hit the mark because you might have a very good cast, but if you don't have a good script, then the cast is wasted. And I think that's the problem with The Mummy in 2017. The cast had just wasted. The script is terrible, and it bombed at the box office. So the Universal Studios Dark Universe never really got to kick off, which is a shame because I think it really could have had potential. So the loss for The Mummy in 2017, or estimated reported loss, is $95 million. And again, you have to ask yourself, how can a movie studio lose $100 million and still be in existence? It's kind of like a Premier League football team where they can lose up to $100 million over a period of 3 seasons and still be in business. I mean, if I had a business and I was losing $1 million, well, even if I was losing 20, 30 pounds, they would come after me for that. They wouldn't let me rest until I paid that debt off. If you can hear some purring, I have got a little black and white cat, and he wants to join us. So, yeah, don't worry, don't adjust the volume. It's just my pussycat. He's a nice little thing anyway. So, Tenant. I really enjoyed this film, but why it bombed, and I think this is one of the few films you can say this bombed because of the pandemic. It was released in August 2020, and a lot of the theatres around the world were either reduced in capacity or closed due to the pandemic. So I'm not surprised it has made a loss, particularly of $100 million. But it's one of those films that I think if they possibly re-released it or done like a Snyderverse version of it and then released that, it would probably do quite well. So up next we have Dark Phoenix. This I think is a surprise for the X-Men because a lot of up until this point, I think a lot of the X-Men films had been relatively successful. Both fans liked them, not half and half of the critics probably liked them, but they were, as a business model, they were something that you could make money on. But then they come up with Dark Phoenix. This is one of those films that I can understand why it failed, because the Dark Phoenix saga is not something that you can just chuck in to a 2-hour or 3-hour film. It's something that takes and needs to be given time. The story and the concept of it all needs to be festering and then building up slowly. So I'm not surprised that this film made a loss. The budget was estimated to be $200 million. Naturally, it did receive negative reviews from critics and fans alike, because I think they did try and rush this too much. So that dipped the value of it at the box office. People didn't go and watch it, so it made an estimated loss of $110 million, which for an X-Men film is quite staggering. Sorry about that. Sticking with the superheroes, Wonder Woman, I think, is probably one of the best DC films that they've made. Not just because of Gal Gadot either. I thought the script, the storytelling, it was quite tight, and there was plenty of character development in there, and you ended up really kind of finding out a bit more about Wonder Woman, what makes her Wonder Woman, some of the trials that she had to go through and conquer and beat. And then she's also battling that inner demon with Zeus. Really nicely done. Then, because of the success, they decided to make Wonder Woman 1984. And to be honest, the pandemic will probably be blamed on this one again because it did come out at that sort of era. But I think had this film been any better, it wouldn't have failed quite as much. It had an estimated loss of $115 million. Um, yeah, it's not great. Let's put it that way. It's not great, and I think it's ended the career at the DCU for Patty Jenkins. Um, Now, I would say, imagine what would happen if she had a Star Wars film to make. Luckily, or unluckily for Star Wars fans, she didn't get to make it, which was X-Wing Squadrons or something, I believe. So, what should we talk about next then? So, another superhero film, which is a bit more recent, and that is Shazam! Fury of the Gods. I didn't see this film. I wanted to go and see this film after the enjoyment that I got out of the first film, and I think it's just one of those films where I wasn't 100% invested in Shazam as I was with some of the X-Men characters and X-Men itself. So I kind of thought I'd wait for it to come out on the streaming platform. I think this is one of the reasons why films today are struggling, because it's not cheap going to the cinema. I went and saw Family X Spies or something with my little girl at the weekend, and it cost us in total about £45, 20 odd pounds for the ticket, and then obviously we had to get something to eat because I wanted to make a day of it. So that was £45 just for the two of us. You couple that with the fact that in 3 or 4 months' time, that film's going to be on a streaming service somewhere. This is the problem I feel that is facing Hollywood, is not only is the product that they're producing woke and dire, why spend and waste money on a film going to the cinema, which traditionally was the best place to watch a film, when in a couple of weeks' time, couple of months' time, it's going to be on a streaming service. You can watch it in your pleasure of your own home, and if you get bored of it, you just switch it off and find something else to watch. I think that's the main reason why these films of recent times have bombed, along with the fact that a lot of them have just been total garbage. So I'm going to finish up with another film, one last film, and then yeah, and then I'll call that it for this episode. So we're going to finish off with Terminator Dark Fate. And this film kind of reminds me like the prequel Alien films, because James Cameron came back big time for this one. And everybody had their hopes up. I was expecting something really good. But it turned out to be the usual Hollywood woke nonsense BS. So I'm not really surprised that it made an estimated loss of $130 million. It ignored the events from the previous Terminator films from Judgment Day 2. So this, in effect, wraps up the Terminator trilogy. So you have the Terminator, Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and then Terminator Dark Fate. So everything else that happened didn't. Maybe that was something that went a bit too far for the hardcore fan base. Some might argue it didn't go far enough. But no, I can see why this one bombed at $130 million, because it wasn't a great film and the potential was there. James Cameron was back, but they squandered it. That is where I'm going to end this episode of Sci-Fi Fans. Hope you've enjoyed me talking to you about some of the biggest box office flops over the years. There are plenty more to talk about, so I can always do a part 2 if you're interested. In the meantime, why not check me out on YouTube, where I give you movie trivia and some theories as well. Some of my recent theories have been on the Alien universe, in particular the events of LV-426, such as how many aliens do we actually see getting killed on screen, and also why or how could there be more aliens than people on LV-426 by the time the Space Marines get there. So that's me recent videos on YouTube. So check out the YouTube channel. Link is in the description below. I've been Wayne, you've been a great audience, and I'll be back next week. Thank you for listening.